Welcome back. In part 2, we move the conversation to discuss some points brought up in a few academic articles, such as how rituals create a liminal space for connection with the invisible realm, the importance of exhibitions for providing spaces of encounter, the importance of religion or spirituality in the art space, what automatism is, and how art can respond to or cope with radical changes in the world. Okay, I thought that we might now shift the discussion to more quote-unquote academic things and use some articles that Ewoud had provided me to give a little bit more of an insight as to his own approach. I thought these were very interesting articles in and of themselves. One is by Lars Bang Larsen called The Other Side, and our own Marco Pazzi, Coming Forth by Night, that discussed the quote-unquote esoteric turn in art. And I'd like to ask you both about, starting with Larsen's article, his suggestion of a telepathic turn, as he calls it, in contemporary art. In that a performance is creating a liminal space to facilitate a connection between the living and the dead or other quote-unquote spiritual entities. What are your thoughts about this concept?
Well, I think a lot of, Walter Benjamin's idea that, the origin of art is effectively its roots are in ritual, and that there are this is the artwork and the activities and the behavior and the rituals that surround it can bring us back as a sort of species into these spaces of potential and possibility. And I think that's something, and it also ties a little bit into Marco's essay, Coming Forth by Night. Really, I think it's worth noting that these types of practices are, they're increasing all the time. We can talk about that in a moment as to why that might be. But I think that, I would see that as something to do with this ritual function or origin of art as talismans or fetishes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Ewoud, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I totally agree with Pádraic, but also I think it's just the idea as a continuum, but that has to live in new generations over and over, and has to find its way in there as a kind of telepathy. You're always in conversation with the past, so to speak, when in any cultural context. And that's also what I intend to do as an artist. So the history of things and where things come from and how they have been before you were there, and how you can kind of meditate those is continuously important.
I suppose the notion of telepathy also ties into the idea of the invisible realm or the or the subtle world. And although visual art lies, primarily in that which we can see, it is ultimately actually really about all the things we can't see or feel. So it's about, training the human mind to be aware of that which is invisible to us.
It's also what Lars Bang Larsen writes about. So this is something that he connects with the word affect. Actually, not what is seen and interpreted is important for the new kind of occultation of art. It's more like the invisible and the felt, the intuited that is coming to the fore in this new generation that takes this occult themes up in their art.
This is very interesting. I'm sure we'll come back to this because it has this telepathic, this communication that's coming, this unseen communication that's coming through someone else. Larsen's suggestion of the telepathic turn is referring to spiritualistic seance sermon. That is the name of the exhibition that he curated together with Marco Pazzi, if I'm not mistaken. Please correct me if I get anything wrong with the things that I'm saying. But yeah, so this idea of a seance, that there's someone communicating from somewhere else, communicating through a medium, and the medium in this instance is the art, I would assume. Correct? Am I correct in that?
Yeah, but also a kind of dead potential of art that is being revived at that moment, around say when he writes this article, 2007. I think that the period from 2007 to 2012 is very important in the manifestation of this kind of new approach in art. So his article is very early, kind of early. There's something happening around that time. He writes this article. Jürgen Habermas writes his article in, I believe, 2009. So 2 years later, he starts writing about this post-secular stage in culture. So Dieter Ruhlstadt responds to this, in this kind of defensive way, trying to defend enlightenment and, questioning the worth of this turn. And then up till 2012, when Anna Colin makes her exhibition on the witch. I think that this is this is really like the years where this kind of turn is happening and is being expressed theoretically, questioned theoretically in the kind of initiatory way.
I think just to add, Ewoud, maybe it's really important to kind of emphasize as well the degree to which, I would say actually since the last decades of the 20th century, and how a lot of these ideas that we've kind of been touching upon over the last while have been popularized and addressed through exhibitions. So I think exhibitions of visual art have been a vital way. Like if you take I think maybe a useful example is an exhibition, I think it was in 1984, maybe 1985, which Maurice Tuchman curated at LACMA, which was called The Spiritual Art in Art, Abstract Painting, dating the date. I think the dates of the show were like 1890 to 1985, the show that the year it happened. And he, provided a very sort of thorough essay, which starts with this kind of canonical book, Thought Forms. And he draws a line from that to 1985. And within this exhibition is a lot of material which wasn't previously considered to be in the realms of fine art, but was presented within that realm in this exhibition. I think, so that's a really crucial starting point. But as Ewoud says, it's really only in the second decade of the 21st century that this type of, I think, curatorial and intellectual approach becomes much more widespread.
Yeah, I totally agree. This exhibition that you mentioned is a watershed exhibition.
Very interesting. Was there anything else you wanted to add, Pádraic?
No, I think that we are in the midst of a sort of, we're in the midst of something that we can't quite understand. It's a moment of cultural foment, which corresponds with a plague and also a technological revolution, which I think is making us much more finely attuned to both our psychic potential and the need to connect remotely. So all of these things are occurring simultaneously, and somewhere within that is the fact that visual art provides us with a space of encounter that's very abstract and undefined. So I think increasingly we will find that the cultural space will actually grow in importance, and somewhere within that will be a kind of innate investigation of the esoteric and the occult, even if we're not calling it that.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I see. Yeah, very interesting. Ewoud.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And as a critical side to that, there's this kind of not calling it by the name, so to speak, is also a bit problematic in this because. In 2013, for instance, when when I was in London, Anna Colin was also in London, and I called her about this exhibition that she made about the witch. It's actually, I have it here. Wait a minute. The name of that exhibition was "Witches Hunted, Appropriated, Empowered, and Queered." I wanted to interview her about this exhibition and about her motivations to make it, and then I mentioned to her, I would also like to talk about the religious implications of this cultural cliche of the witch. I was studying Wicca at the time, and of course that's a kind of a post-war revival religion. And it doesn't feature in her book as such, so I wanted to ask her about that, and then it was like I said something dirty, and I didn't hear back after that, because the religious is still, we're still in this kind of secular. Modus operandi, I think, and to talk about religion is for a lot of people obviously quite, or talk in these terms is quite difficult for some people. It's misunderstood in a way. So when you're talking about the spiritual in art and about the occult in art and the esoteric in art, it's for me entirely connected to religion, and you have to bring it into the discussion.
You have to bring faith into the discussion.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you do need to bring religion. Religion suggests, I guess, organization and kind of quite dogma. And I think these are where religiosity or faith becomes sort of detached from its potential, and it enters into a more dogmatic realm.
Yeah, that's true, but it's really no. I'm disagreeing here. You have to talk in terms of religion, because it's not only dogma; it's also community and identity, etc., etc. And these topics are very important at the moment. And when you, for instance, in this exhibition that I just mentioned, I see kind of the beginning as well of talking about these topics in a kind of identitarian sense, in a community building sense. And so it's a kind of repetition of these mechanisms that are also happening in a religion, and that can be very exclusionary, and actually they are becoming that also. And I find it sad to see, that is actually happening in the art scene as well. So I think we have to look at these topics in the most inclusive way as possible, and also include these difficult terms. That means having to do that as well.
So are you referring to the occult as representing the rejected in traditional religion, that we need to be looking at it in that sense? Well,
of course, the rejected, I think you have to interpret as that what is marginalized, which is not canonized or dogmatized or whatever, but lives on the fringes, so to speak, but continues there. But within these fringes, these kind of exclusionary mechanisms can also happen, So that's why I'm so happy actually to have met Marco and the research center on the history of religion. That is actually that. It is the history of religion, and that's where the occult and the esoteric are part of. So it's this larger term. I'm not so afraid of this term, actually, myself.
I think within most religious organizations, you have a hierarchical and quite centralized system, which what I find, more attractive about some of the, practices like chaos magic, which emerged from Wicca, I suppose, is that they really they're built around the individual, and those individuals can form legions and they can communicate, but it's not necessarily built on a kind of hierarchical structure. So I think that would be, I totally get your point, Ewoud. I guess it's just, I think Blavatsky sidestepped it beautifully by refusing to call theosophy a religion, but just called it like religion with a capital R. So it was, the sort of the essence of it, without which of course was itself a very hierarchical organization. So
the funny thing, Pádraic, is Stephanie just posted a very interesting little lecture on Facebook of I think she's an Italian woman talking about chaos magic and the kind of political ruptures that took part in that. And there again, you see the same thing happening. This completely hierarchical, exclusionary mechanisms that are happening in religious movements and the discussions that are happening there. So for me, it's again, a proof that you need to bring this into the discussion and head on,
I think maybe what makes this particular conversation really worth bringing it back to the sort of beginning, and that is that we're, I suppose, talking about cultural practitioners, specifically visual artists in this instance. And I think what's very important to remember is that most of the individuals working in the contemporary sphere who refer to or even utilize these practices are not initiates in any way, and in fact they use practices in a very sort of magpie approach, but also in quite a radical approach. And so I think that's maybe why, there's just the constellation of contemporary artists who are kind of actively using these may not themselves be very invested in them, but perhaps, that is actually, there's something within that. That's how to stop. It's reactivating the potential of these movements while disposing of the outmoded kind of structures that can often surround them.
I wonder. Really, I'm not so sure. It's not going there. It's not what I see happening. Actually, it's something that you actually hoped for that would happen. But I'm a bit on the negative side on that.
Well, that's interesting. And this kind of segues beautifully into the next question that I wanted to ask you about, referring back to Marco Pasi's idea that the occult represents the rejected in traditional religion, and that this serves as a type of ally to contemporary artists, but not, as he puts it, necessarily sharing its spiritual beliefs or indulging in emotional participation. So referring to what Pádraic perhaps meant when he was saying that it's kind of a magpie hodgepodge type of thing. They're not really participating in the actual practices of these movements, but just taking things in the chaos magic style of taking things that's a very pragmatic approach, whatever works for you. But not that you have to necessarily really put any faith or belief in it. So how do you feel about that, Ewoud?
Yeah, I think that was the situation, and that's changing now.
Oh,
actually, I think actually the way that this kind of appropriation now is developing is actually more rigid. It's becoming rigorous and and it's becoming maybe even dogmatic. In certain practices, especially where it's about identity and community building, so to speak. Well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I see it wrong, but I have this impression.
So, am I understanding you correctly that it's more of an idea in the sense of what Suzi Gablik was talking about in her book, The Reenchantment of Art, about this reframing the worldview and making it more participatory and
with a
sense of community?
Yeah.
Because this was an older book, but what she's talking about is very relevant for today, I would think.
Well, I think so too. She's a special case, I think, because she's totally forgotten now. But she saw a lot of this coming very early on, and kind of participated in it as well, in the development of it with her books. Yeah. But no, in the sense of I don't know where.
I think we're speaking about a really broad subject here. There are, there are as many different approaches to there's so many artists are approaching, the relationship with the occult in so many different ways. Sometimes it's very surface. It's merely the representation of esoteric symbols, etc. Sometimes I think it's very embedded. But maybe I think what I find really interesting that's occurring simultaneously is the recuperation of artists who are no longer alive, from a kind of art historical or institutional level. Hilma af Klint is probably obviously the most popular example, but I think there are multiple other examples of, artists who are, these exhibitions are now very much framed within the spiritual. The spiritual investigations that made those artists' work possible are now being presented as part of those exhibitions, which I don't think was previously the case. So I find that really interesting, because what it means is that really those ideas are gaining currency, whereas previously I think they were ghettoized and exoticized,
or just
so
ignored.
This to me is it's ignored. So I just think that's maybe an interesting occurrence of the contemporary situation as well.
Very excellent point. And then this brings us back to automatism then. I don't think we really talked about what that is. Who would like to explain that?
Well, I think you should, because it ties directly, it ties directly into your research into the particular shifts in surrealism and the way, the kind of disavowal of it as a strategy within the movement. So I think it's important for you to talk about that.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'll try.
Okay.
Well, automatism was really a Bretonian surrealist method of freeing the mind of its shackles and letting the creative flow run free, so to speak, without preconceived or like no limits or constraints. This is really Breton was a writer, and he got this kind of impetus, I think, from spiritualism. It works to a certain extent the same with visual arts, where you can almost like you're writing or spontaneously act and react on what's happening on the page or on the canvas or wherever, and go into a kind of meditative flow in that. Yeah. So I guess that's pretty much what it does, automatism. But to get to work, and a lot of visual artists have been pointing that out to Breton, had been So the visual artists who were part of the Surrealist movement said, yeah, it works to a certain point, but not where it comes to really deciding what is valid and not in what's happened in that moment. So there's a point of choice making, actually. And also Seligmann says there's actually also even an a priori. So there's you can have automatism, but it is always constrained by whatever you're using at the time. So it's limited by the means, so to speak. So it's not entirely free. There's always this limitation and constraint of the material and its realities. So they were critical of that, and Seligmann wrote a kind of a critique of that and published it in one of the magazines in America that was outside of Breton's editorial reach. And I don't think that did their relationship much good.
You wrote in a little pamphlet that accompanies your latest publication about this break between Breton and Seligmann, about this, that you suspect that it had to do with this issue of the whether or not automatism is, if it works or not, and how Seligmann said that, or actually critiqued it, saying that it doesn't have a place in the visual art field. And that's what kind of cinched it for Seligmann with the Surrealists, because that was just kind of like a place they couldn't find any common ground anymore because their views were so different. Correct?
Or
not?
Yeah, and also I also think that in a way that Seligmann as a theorist was quite autonomous and independent, and he wrote a whole series of articles that were either published in Breton's editorial reach, so in VVV, or in View outside of Breton's editorial reach. And I think Seligmann actually was a little bit piqued by the fact that he wasn't involved as an editor in VVV, the Surrealist magazine that Breton set up in America. So they were getting a kind of a rivalous relationship, and I think that this very fundamental issue of automatism and critiquing that in the way that he did kind of must have been unacceptable for Breton. But then it had to break over a kind of an insignificant issue involving Tarot. But I think this is really the matter that did it, and it kind of culminated in this article. Yeah.
I think the crucial thing about the idea of automatism as well is the notion of becoming a channel for something that's beyond you, becoming a medium and surrendering and emptying out the self, which I think is something that, it brings together a number of the ideas we've been talking about, from, both in connecting with higher entities, but also sort of surrendering authorship. It's a really, and it was of great interest to a lot of 20th century artists. But I think, to maybe touch a bit upon the great invocation, one of the things I tried to do at that exhibition was, I suppose, underscore the degree to which this notion of mediumship continues amongst contemporary artists as a sort of as an interesting concept. So I think maybe some of these ideas have again become full circle, though possibly we're using different terminology to talk about them.
Yeah, indeed, and but this is something that's for an artist when you're working in more traditional maybe media like painting or something. It's always, there's always this moment where you get out of, where you get into the zone and out of control, so to speak, or things start happening by themselves almost, this kind of meditative level of concentration, so to speak. And this is also why I like the term invocation so much, and also in relation to evocation, actually, because I feel there's a dynamic going on between that is what is being created and the person that is creating it, so to speak. There's a dialogue going on there. So the person who's making is informing that what is made at the moment, but what is made is also informing the person that is making it, so to speak. And this I relate to these two terms, like evocation and invocation. That there's a current of if you could maybe translate them into different terms of projection or on an image, and the image projects outward as well, so to speak. So something is being evocated and something is being invocated at the same time, so to speak. Do you get my drift a little bit here, or is this too vague? Okay.
No, not at all. I think it's very, very interesting. Super interesting stuff. And I'm glad that you're explaining it like this, because it's helping me to understand this much, much better. There is one final question I'd like to ask of you both. And it's regarding the interesting discourse that Ewoud discusses in his own article. And that was entitled Playing with the Other in the Beyond, from March 2015, that deals with the ideas surrounding the term post-secularism introduced by Habermas, and this has been referred to already in our discussion today, but especially the discourse that purports that a spiritual or occult turn in art would imply regression, and that attempts to quote-unquote re-enchant our society through art just plunges us back into the dark abyss. Now, this is an older argument, of course, but I'd like to ask you both about your thoughts about how you see art developing now and the potential course for the future. Who would like to start?
Can I go first with that?
Yes.
I mean, I think there is, one of the, well, again, it's a very broad, the esoteric turn is a very broad subject. And I think obviously within that there is ideas of withdrawal and detachment and a kind of removal of the self in some instances from the realities of the present, in which the I suppose more dictatorial, totalitarian realities that we're facing, both through technology and through the sort of drift towards, I suppose, right-wing populism. The question is, how can art in general cope with this or respond, or should it have to? And we are talking about art here, so I'm going to root my response in cultural production. So I think it's interesting to think of examples of individual artists who have attempted to fuse their engagement with esoteric practices and visual art. So I think of example to an artist who comes to mind is Chiara Fumai, who currently has an exhibition here in Brussels. And she, I suppose, is an example of someone who's tried to fuse together her engagement with, I suppose, chaos magic, and, you know, with more, I suppose, explicitly, well, in this case, I guess, Italian Marxism, combined with forms of radical feminism and terrorist propaganda. Then you have other artists like Linda Stupart, for example, who takes magical practices from Wicca and creates spells to bind certain figures who she sees as symbolic of female repression. So I think, you know, we are speaking about very broad terms, but I think there are multiple examples of individuals who try and create a hybrid of esoterically infused art that also attempts to have strength and potential at this very turbulent time.
I think the big difference between artists today and from earlier times is that those of earlier times in a way were kind of programmatic towards the esoteric and the occult. So they were how do you say it, promoting it in a way, and I think the current and I think hopefully this stays like that. Is the current practice is to work with it in a critical way, to actually to use it as a critical tool, so I really hope that this kind of programmatic approach that I mentioned earlier, that I'm a bit afraid of, that is rearing its head currently, won't take over actually, and that we remain critical, and that we keep using this new realm as a critical tool. It's not even a new realm, you know. But it's a kind of how would you say that? Something that is from somewhere older, turning into something new, and evolving in something that has been better than before, so to speak. It can be placed, or it can be not appropriate, but it can be taken into the culture, or have a cultural role in a better way than it had before, if we are careful with it, and critical about it.
Just this esoteric turn that we're talking about it as well. I do think it's emerged as a result of disillusionment with
for
the
sure.
sphere of visual art in general, because we had arrived at a point in which we were at an impasse as to where culture could be taken. So I see this, to call it again, esoteric turn, as a sort of, it epitomizes a greater need and appetite to maybe salvage back the transformative, restorative potential of culture.
So in so many words, we were already regressed. We were already in a regression.
It depends on your term. It depends on your definition of regression. I think it's a very loaded term.
Yeah. I mean, in the sense of plunging into the dark abyss as if you are going backward instead of moving forward. It's at least that's how I was interpreting what you were saying is at the beginning, is that we were already in this kind of impoverished state. And now that art is trying to take us out of that, or did I misunderstand you?
Well, I'm a strong believer in the utopian function of art, and I think that obviously it's a very broad spectrum of practices. Art, obviously, there's a market, and then there is its intellectual value, but then there is something I think that is separate from those, and that is to bring it back to this idea of ritual or community building sort of agent that can bring us together in both very tangible and intangible ways. And so I think we need that now more than ever. And so that maybe brings that maybe we will start to think more about these notions of sort of that brings with it a kind of reemergence of some of these ideas of, the shamanic function of the artist, etc., which have their own problems. I mean, it's a very romantic idea, but I think a very valid one.
Yeah, I agree. To turn back to Theosophy, it was an amazing progressive movement. Actually, it did a lot for decolonization, for women, for feminism, etc. It was certainly progressive on that side, and but as you can often see that progressive movements can turn into kind of a reactionary or go into a reactionary phase, and that would be sad if this momentum that we have would turn into something like that again. But I totally agree with Pádraic in the utopian possibilities of art, and really to art as a tool to for inquiry, critical inquiry.
Yeah. If I can share a little bit about my own personal feelings about the exhibition, I kind of approach art intuitively because I don't have the training. My artistic, quote unquote, artistic background is in the area of dancing. So it's very different from visual arts in the sense of painting and drawing and that sort of thing. And I don't have the theory that goes along with all of that training and the history associated with that. So I approach it more in an intuitive way. And I have to say about this exhibition, I felt that it was very accessible. And I've heard from people, friends and acquaintances that aren't, very knowledgeable themselves about art, that they feel art is kind of like this, that has a barrier, and that people it's very difficult for people to engage with the art because they don't understand the art on whatever level they're trying to understand it. But for me, I thought that this exhibition, it was inviting, and it's made me feel like I could understand the art, maybe not in the same way that the artists had envisioned the art and thought about the art themselves, but I could connect with it in some way. I could engage with it in some way. It's made me think of certain things. It referenced certain things in my mind, and it also helped in the sense that because I had these references, I could talk about it with other people. Whereas in the past, if I would be seeing other pieces of art, I didn't really know what to say about it. I didn't know how to respond to it. And I didn't have that feeling at all at this exhibition. I felt it was super welcoming in that regard. So as far as community is concerned, I think that it was very successful in that regard because at least from my feeling and also for Thomas, if I can speak for him, we both felt really drawn into the art and engaged with it. So I think that was a success on both of your parts in that regard.
Well, I think our art exists on multiple levels, some of it more esoteric than others. I think probably one of the motifs throughout the exhibition was a tendency towards geometric abstraction, which itself has its own language. But also, I think any exhibition has to exist both on a kind of intellectual level and as a space of physical encounter, where you can have all types of different experiences. I'm interested there just to hear your background is in dance, because of course the history of modern dance too is infused with esoteric traditions. I think of Mary Wigman, Laban, etc. All of this, the modernism in general has been, I think, the history of it has been told in a very particular way, which over the last 2 decades, fortunately, we are all, we are seeing that in fact there were many strands to it, many types of hidden learning. So dance too, you reminded me of these figures who I find intriguing.
They are very intriguing, and this aspect is not really even discussed a lot. And I find that to be a shame. There's so much to learn about the people, what was informing them and inspiring them. But I'm not so much in the area of modern and contemporary dance, more in classical ballet. But I did have some, of course, lessons and training in various dance forms. But yeah, a lot of times you didn't have this history behind it. So that's why I like to talk to you today, and I want to include more discussions like this so that we can learn more about this background. And
I think maybe just one thing I wanted to say before we end is that I think what's really happening is it's something. We started this conversation with the kind of periods in which we were born, etc. And I do feel that there is creeping back in, I guess, a willingness to live without irony and to be earnest about one's convictions and to have true faith. And certainly in the sphere of art practice, I think one is now quite would be forgiven for very staunchly defending their spiritual belief systems, whereas I think possibly 20 or 30 years ago, Ewoud, you can tell me this, that type of approach might have been dismissed or possibly even mocked.
Yeah.
So I think
definitely.
we're witnessing the birth of a sort of new a new position on what it means to hold subjective spiritual beliefs.
Yeah. Referring back to Suzi Gablik, if you would read her, this is 1984, I think. Has modernism failed? It's totally relevant for today in the way that indeed, this kind of attitude towards what we're talking about here is radically changing.
It's very interesting that these older ideas are still so relevant, and I would agree with you, Pádraic, that there is more of a acceptance now for the subjective experience. I hope that continues, but I will be certain to put the books by Suzi Gablik in the program notes of this episode. I actually bought the book, The Reenchantment of Art, for a completely different discussion altogether. So it's very, and read it, and was just blown away. And I keep looking, I'm like, when was this book written? And I'm like, it's an older book. It's from 1991. So I was, just amazed about how timely it is. So very, very interesting that this kind of comes back around full circle, that these people are popping up everywhere. So
I hope she will get her due again. I hope she will be more widely read again.
Yeah. I'll be sure to include it so people can check her out, because I think she has some interesting things to say. Well, Pádraic and Ewoud, I want to thank you so much for being patient with me today with all the technical difficulties that I've been experiencing, and for sharing your thoughts and your views about art, about esotericism, about how you see things developing. I really enjoyed the discussion, and just really thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
I hope you've enjoyed this discussion, and I'd like to thank Pádraic and Ewoud again for sharing their insights and for being so generous with their time, especially with the technical issues that we had on the day of the interview. I thought that they brought so many interesting things to the discussion, and it's provided me with a lot of food for thought for future episodes about this topic. Please check out the program notes for the articles that were mentioned from Lars Bang-Larsen and from Dr. Marco Pazzi. Also, information about Suzi Gablik's work, plus the links to Pádraic's website and Ewoud's pages, social media links, and other material that was kindly provided for me to share with you all. There's a lot there that's really worth a look. It's kind of hard to believe that it's already December and that 2022 is nearly upon us. But I'd like to thank you all for your support of my platform this year. And if you haven't already done so, a review about the podcast, a subscription to the YouTube channel, or a share of my content would be greatly appreciated and will help me to grow my platform and audience. I wish you all a very happy and safe holiday season, and I'll see you again in January. Best wishes to you all, and as always, thanks for listening.